Hey guys, welcome back to another impressions video, and today I'm going to talk about this game right here, Yoshi's New Island for the Nintendo 3DS, an early 2014 release that I recently got thanks to a pretty good sale that Best Buy had for first party Nintendo games, and I'm pretty glad I waited because it was a very good sale and I got this game for a very good price. As far as my impressions on the game, I think this is a pretty enjoyable and good platformer overall, but when compared to the original Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo, this game falls short in pretty much every regard, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because the original Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo is one of the best games for the system, and there's nothing wrong with this game not being able to live up to those expectations. Again, it's a good platformer. It doesn't introduce really anything new, but it's enjoyable, and I'm glad I beat this game, and I'm glad I gave it a chance. Essentially, the story is always the same. In this case, baby Luigi gets kidnapped, and it's up to a group of Yoshis to help baby Mario get to his brother and rescue him, and that's pretty much the story. Always very simple. But as far as the graphics, this is one point that it was received pretty badly among fans of the series. When Nintendo first unveiled this game, a lot of people were disappointed with how this game looks in comparison to the original Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo. And the thing is, I have to admit that the Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo, it has one of the best art directions out of any game I've ever played, like ever. That color book, almost hand-drawn type of art direction that the game has, it really makes that game timeless, and it's one of the best looking games ever. And even if you play that game from 20 years from now, it'll still look great just because of the way that the game was developed. Now, this new Yoshi's Island takes a little bit more of a quote-unquote realistic approach. The character models for both Yoshi and Baby Mario are more 3D based, if you will. But the good news is that the backgrounds, they still have that charm, that artsy kind of look that in my opinion looks great, and especially if you use the 3D effect in this game, which I thought it was interesting. It's not the best use of the 3D effect of the 3DS hardware, but it's very pleasant. You do have to crank the 3D all the way up because it's a very soft, very mild 3D effect that you really have to crank that slide bar all the way up to notice anything. But I'm actually glad that they went with this art direction. I know I'm gonna be in the minority, but it looks different from the original one, and different in a good way, in my opinion. It's still a very pleasant game to look at. It's colorful. It still has that hand-drawn, artsy type of look, and it doesn't look as good or as timeless as the original one, but in my opinion, that's okay. And I'm glad the game looks different because this game is basically the same in every regard, especially gameplay-wise. It's pretty much a carbon copy of the Super Nintendo game, which is good news if you like that game. Yoshi controls basically the same. If you hold your jump button, Yoshi can float in the air for a little bit. If you tap the R button, you get your aiming reticule on the screen, and if you have X, you can shoot. And that's basically how you can defeat enemies that way, or you can solve puzzles that way. Basically the same mechanics of the Super Nintendo game are in here. A few differences are that now you can swallow giant eggs that you can use as huge projectiles, and basically they can destroy anything in its path. But it does feel kind of forced into the game. It's not a natural addition, if you will. The levels that do have those giant eggs are kind of designed for them. So it's nothing great, nothing that's gonna make you go very impressed with the game. So like I said, the gameplay is basically the same from the Super Nintendo games, and the level design is also similar in the sense that this is a platforming game that it focuses a little bit on exploration. There's a lot of collectibles in each level, and it's pretty difficult. If you want to finish this game 100%, it's a challenging game because there's a lot to collect on each level, and at the end of each level you get your your list of things that you have to collect, and it's pretty difficult to get all 3 of them to 100%. And if you do that, you get things like bonus levels that personally I haven't unlocked. I have to go back and do that. But if you're looking to beat this game without worrying about the collectibles, I do have to say that this is a super easy game. I beat the game with, I think, 95 lives left. And so if you're looking for a challenge, this is not the place to go. Unless, again, you're going for 100% of the collectibles. And I've heard that the secret levels in this game are pretty challenging. But as far as the, not worrying about the collectibles, this game is really easy. It took me about 8 hours, I think. There are 6 worlds. And the levels are pretty varied. And like I said, they focus a little bit on exploration, but the levels are smaller than the original Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo. That game had, from what I remember, pretty big levels that really require you to sometimes backtrack in order to go to secret areas. And this game is, very similar in that regard, but the levels are a little bit smaller, and thus you have a little bit less exploration than in the original game. As far as other gameplay aspects to the game, in some levels Yoshi can transform to different objects or different types of vehicles, which is something similar to the Super Nintendo version of the game as well, so nothing new in there, to be honest. One thing that this game got criticized quite often is the soundtrack, and I do have to admit that there are some pretty odd songs in this game, especially the intro theme or the title theme of this game is just plain awful. I just can't believe Nintendo let that pass, or let it go, because the title theme of this game is truly atrocious, to be honest. But I think a lot of people exaggerate a little bit when they say that the soundtrack of this game is awful, because the rest of the songs are pretty good. They're pretty tolerable. There's only like 2 or 3 tracks that are god awful, but the rest of the tracks in the game are good and in its own way. And there are some songs that resemble some other tracks from the original Yoshi's Island on the Super Nintendo. So for the most part, I think it was an odd soundtrack, but not as bad as some people will maybe make you think. So overall, gameplay wise, it's basically the same thing as a Super Nintendo game. Level design wise, the levels are a little bit shorter, but when compared to other platformers, they still have that exploration element to it, where you have to go backtrack sometimes and do things like that. But there's nothing too memorable about the level design in this game, and again, it's a good platformer, but don't expect this game to come anywhere close to the awesomeness that the original Yoshi's Island for the Super Nintendo is. For what it's worth, I had a lot of fun with this game, but again, it's good and nothing more than that. It's a good game, good platformer, decent level design, very enjoyable graphics, very enjoyable to look at, decent 3D effect like I mentioned earlier. So if you guys like platformers, definitely give this one a shot. If you guys enjoyed the Super Nintendo version of this game, definitely give this one a shot, because it's very similar in a lot of regards. Just go with low expectations and don't expect this to come anywhere close to the brilliance of the first game. But Yoshi's New Island, a very enjoyable game, a good platformer. Give it a shot if you like platformers. So that's it for now. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all later.